A rancher found a native girl beaten for fleeing marriage. The next day, she asked to be his instead, but the blood on her torn dress told only half the story. Garrett Holloway pulled his horse, Marie, to a stop. The creek whispered beside him, willow branches dipping into the water like they were telling secrets. But the only secret here was one of violence. What he saw crumpled on the muddy bank would tear down everything he thought he knew. About courage, about justice, and about the man he was supposed to be. She was a heap of buckskin and bruises. Her black hair, a tangled mess of leaves and dirt, hid a face that was a roadmap of someone's cruelty. The dress, once a beautiful thing of beads and skilled hands, was ripped and stained. Dark bruises flowered on her skin like angry thunderclouds. She couldn't have been more than 20. But it was her eyes that froze him. Through the pain, through the exhaustion, they burned. A fire that hadn't been put out, a defiance that hadn't been broken. Those eyes met his. They didn't ask for help. They didn't plead for mercy. They just waited. Garrett swung his leg over the saddle, his spurs jingling a nervous tune. 20 years in Wyoming had taught him to read the land. The twitch of a horse's ear meant danger. The silence before a storm meant trouble. This silence was different. This was the breath the world takes right before lightning splits the sky. The creek didn't care. It just kept bubbling along. A meadowlark sang somewhere in the cottonwoods, a sweet song in the middle of a nightmare. The sun was low, painting the world in gold and long shadows. A peaceful scene, the kind of peace that makes violence feel even uglier. She watched him get closer. She was still as a deer, deciding whether to run or to fight. Her breathing was shallow, controlled. She was hurting. Bad. He could see one arm cradled tight against her ribs. Dried blood traced a line from her mouth. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to help, far enough not to spook her. He'd spent more of his 30 years with horses than with people, and he knew a wounded thing needed space. She spoke first. Her voice was a whisper, but it was solid as rock. The words were in her own tongue, flowing like the creek beside them. Then she saw his confusion and switched to a careful, clear English. "You will help me, or you will not. But do not stand there pitying me." The words hit him like a punch. Not because they were mean, but because they were true. He was pitying her. Looking at her like a broken animal, weighing the trouble against the kindness. It was a shameful thought, and she had seen it right on his face. "I will help you," he said. The words felt small, but they were all he had. Something in her face changed. Not relief. Recognition. Like he'd just passed a test he didn't even know he was taking. He shrugged off his heavy duster and held it out. She looked at it, then at him, then gave a tiny nod. He draped it over her shoulders. She didn't flinch when he got close, but he could feel the tension in her, a coiled spring ready to snap. Trust was a currency she couldn't afford to spend. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded again, and he saw the pain it cost her to straighten her back. Pride was the only thing holding her together. "My place is 2 miles west. You can rest there, get cleaned up. Then we'll figure out what comes next." "What comes next?" she repeated, like the words were from a different language. "Yes, I suppose we will." He helped her onto his horse, his touch light, professional. She settled in the saddle like she was born there, injuries be damned. Her hands, he noticed, were strong. Working hands. As they rode toward his ranch, the setting sun at their backs, Garrett kept stealing glances at her. She sat straight, her eyes scanning the horizon. A habit of someone who knew danger could come from anywhere. The wind lifted strands of her dark hair, a stark contrast to the pale canvas of his coat. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full. The silence of two people who knew that words were cheap. But questions buzzed in his head like angry bees. Who was she? What happened at that creek? And why did he feel like he'd been searching for her his whole damn life, without even knowing it? He had a feeling the answers were going to bring a whole world of trouble right to his door. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he cared. The Holloway Ranch was a patch of hard work carved out of the wilderness. 15 years of sweat and stubbornness. The house was solid timber and riverstone. The barn was bigger than the house. That told you everything you needed to know about Garrett Holloway's priorities. As they rode up, his foreman, Miguel, looked up from a fence he was mending. Miguel Hernandez had been with Garrett for 8 years. He'd come up from Texas with a past he didn't talk about and a quiet competence that spoke for itself. He was the only man Garrett trusted completely. Miguel saw the woman on Garrett's horse, the bruises, the torn dress. His face didn't change. No surprise, no questions. He just set down his tools and came to take the reins. That was Miguel's way. Deal with what's in front of you. Ask questions later, if they still matter. She needs a place to rest, Garrett said. It was all the explanation needed. Miguel nodded. Elena is in town, but the spare room is clean. I will heat water. Elena was Miguel's wife, a tiny woman with the spirit of a grizzly bear. She'd taken it upon herself to keep Garrett from living in complete squalor. A battle she was slowly winning. Garrett helped the woman down. She bit back a gasp of pain as her feet hit the ground. Her ankle was swollen thick. "What's your name?" he asked, as they walked slow toward the house. She was silent for a long moment. He thought she wouldn't answer. "Ayanna," she finally said. "Ayanna," he repeated. The name felt heavy, important. "I'm Garrett Holloway." She looked around, at the house, the barn, the cattle dotting the hills. Her gaze wasn't idle. It was measuring. She wasn't seeing a ranch. She was seeing a life. She was judging its worth. "You built this alone?" she asked. "Mostly. Miguel helped with the barn. And now you are alone here." It wasn't a question. He wondered what she saw. A lonely man who preferred the company of horses? A man who'd built walls around himself with timber and stone? "I'm alone here," he confirmed. They reached the porch. The sun was bleeding across the sky, colors of copper and gold that matched her skin. A coyote yipped in the distance. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice quiet. The real answer was complicated. Because her eyes dared him to be a better man. Because leaving her was not an option. Because in his 30 years of solitude, he'd never seen strength and vulnerability look so much like the same thing. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said instead. "It was the simple truth. And sometimes the simple truth is enough." She seemed to think so. She nodded and let him help her up the steps. The spare room was small and clean. Miguel brought a basin of warm water, towels, and a jar of Elena's herbal salve that smelled of sage and mountain rain. "I'll leave you," Garrett said. "There's food if you're hungry. Rest." Ayanna sank onto the bed, the iron control she'd maintained finally starting to crack. She looked young, and so damn tired. "Thank you," she whispered. He went to the kitchen. His hands were shaking a little. He'd patched up animals, stitched up men. But the quiet dignity of this woman had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't explain. He ate stale bread and drank bitter coffee without tasting a thing. His mind kept going back to the creek, to her eyes. The way she'd looked at him. Not as a rancher, but as a man. Really looked. And what she saw, he realized, made him want to be worthy of that look. Miguel joined him at the table. They drank their coffee, listening to the quiet sounds from the other room. Water splashing, the rustle of cloth. "She is Shoshone," Miguel said, his voice low. Garrett looked at him. "You're sure?" "The beadwork on her dress, the way she carries herself. Elena taught me to notice." Miguel took a sip of coffee. "There is a reservation 40 miles north. She is not from there." "How do you know?" "The reservation women wear government clothes now. Her dress is old ways, made by someone who still believes." They sat in the quiet, the unspoken questions hanging heavy in the air. Who hurt her? Why? And when were they coming to look for her? Because they would come. Someone always comes. There will be trouble, Miguel said, finally putting a voice to their thoughts. Not maybe, certainly. A woman like that does not run from nothing, and she does not get those bruises for a small reason. Miguel was right. Garrett had kept his nose out of the tensions between the settlers and the native tribes. It was a fragile peace, easily broken, and offering shelter to a runaway Shoshone woman was like taking a hammer to that peace. But listening to the sounds from the next room, he found he didn't give a damn. Tomorrow could bring a war party to his door. Tonight, all that mattered was the injured woman sleeping under his roof. The sound stopped. Garrett hoped she was asleep. He hoped she wasn't dreaming. Gonna check the stock, he told Miguel. It was an excuse. He needed to move, to work off the nervous energy coiling in his gut. Work was how Garrett Holloway thought things through. Outside, the stars were a brilliant, cold spray across a black sky. The horses were quiet in the barn, their breath steaming in the crisp air. He stopped at Storm's stall, his gray mare. She was born in a blizzard, a fighter from her first breath, just like the woman in his house. What do you think, girl? He murmured, stroking her neck. About our visitor? Storm nudged him, accepting. Horses were good judges of character. They knew a dangerous soul from a wounded one. Walking back to the house, he saw a light on in the spare room. A shadow moved behind the curtain. She wasn't asleep. She was standing at the window, looking out into the darkness. Was she planning to run again? Did she trust him enough to stay till morning? Or had life taught her that safety was just a moment between dangers? The house was quiet. He banked the fire, checked the locks. Habits of a man living on the edge of the wild. But tonight, the wild didn't feel like it was outside. It felt like it had walked right through his front door and was sleeping in his spare room. And he knew, deep in his bones, that nothing on this ranch would ever be the same again. Dawn broke cold and clear. Garrett woke before the sun, the rhythm of the ranch baked into his bones. He moved quietly, not wanting to wake her. But when he got to the kitchen, she was already there. She stood by the window, watching his horses move like ghosts in the pre-dawn mist. She'd braided her hair. The bruises on her face looked even darker in the pale light. She was wearing one of his shirts over her tattered dress. It hung down to her knees. She looked small, but not fragile. Never fragile. "Good morning," he said softly. She turned. Her gaze was as direct as ever. She'd been studying him, taking his measure. "Good morning," she replied. "I hope you do not mind. I used your kitchen." He looked around. She hadn't just used it. She'd tamed it. Coffee was brewing, smelling rich and warm. Eggs were scrambled in a pan, bread toasted and waiting. In one morning, she'd made his kitchen feel more like a home than it had in 15 years. "I don't mind," he said. "Thank you." They ate in silence, watching the sun spill over the mountains. The coffee was the best he'd ever had. The eggs were seasoned with herbs he couldn't name, but they tasted like the wild, beautiful places of this land. "You cook well," he said. "I was taught by women who believed that feeding people was a form of prayer." There was a sadness in her voice when she said it. "They said, when you put love into food, people can taste it. When you put anger or sadness, they taste that too." "What did you put in this?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Gratitude," she said, "and a little bit of wondering what happens next." After breakfast, they walked to the barn. She moved better today, though she still favored her ankle. She watched him with his horses, her attention total. She wasn't just watching him work, she was watching him be. "My father taught me that horses were gifts from the Creator," she said, stroking Storm's nose. The mare leaned into her touch. "He said you could read a person's character by how they treated an animal that had no choice but to trust them." She looked at him over the stall door. "Your horses are not afraid of you. That says something." Before he could ask what it said, a sound cut through the morning quiet. Hoofbeats. 3 riders, coming up the valley. They weren't moving at a friendly pace. They were moving like men on a hunt. Ayanna went rigid beside him. Her hand shot out and gripped his arm. her fingers surprisingly strong. "I must tell you something," she said, her voice urgent, low. "Before they reach us." The riders were getting closer. He could see the lead man was Sheriff Tom Morrison, a decent man for the most part. The other two were Shoshone. Their faces were grim. "Yesterday," Ayanna said, her voice tight, "I was to be married. To a man I did not choose. When I refused, he beat me. When I still refused, others joined him. I ran." Garrett could feel the tremor in her hand, the fierce control in her voice. "But I am not a possession. I am not a blanket to be traded between men." The riders were almost there. He could see the beadwork on one man's vest, the feathers in the other's hair. These were important men. Men used to getting what they wanted. "What do you want from me?" Garrett asked her, his eyes locked on the approaching threat. She looked up at him. And in her eyes, he saw a fire that took his breath away. It wasn't desperation. It was a terrifying, beautiful hope. The look of someone betting everything on one last chance. On him. "I want to choose my own life," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "And if you will have me, I choose you." The words landed like a physical blow. A part of him had been waiting for them, had known this was coming since he saw her at the creek. But hearing them, with trouble riding straight for them, changed everything. Saying yes would make him an enemy. It would put a target on both their backs. It would shatter the quiet life he had so carefully built. It would be the most reckless, stupid, dangerous thing he had ever done. He looked down into her fierce, hopeful eyes. He thought of his lonely house, his empty years. He thought of a lifetime of playing it safe. The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust. Sheriff Morrison swung down from his horse. "Morning, Garrett," he said, his eyes flicking to Ayanna and then back. "We're looking for a young Shoshone woman. Name of Ayanna. Ran off from her people. They're worried about her." One of the native men spoke, his voice hard. "She is promised to my brother. She must come home." The man with the beaded vest stepped forward. His face was like carved stone. "I am Joseph Standing Bear. This woman is my brother's intended. The bride price has been paid, 20 horses. She shames her family by running away like a child." Garrett felt Ayanna's grip on his arm. He looked at her, then back at the three men. His mind, which had been a storm of doubt and fear, was suddenly calm. Crystal clear. He knew what he had to do. He looked Sheriff Morrison square in the eye. "Sheriff," he said, his voice steady, "I'd like you to meet my intended bride." The silence was so complete you could hear the buzz of a fly 10 feet away. Sheriff Morrison's eyebrows shot up into his hairline. Joseph Standing Bear's face went dark, a storm gathering. The third man, the one with the feathers in his hair, slowly put his hand on the hilt of his knife. "That is not possible," Standing Bear said, his voice low and dangerous. "She is promised." "I never agreed," Ayanna said. She stepped out from behind Garrett, standing beside him. A partner, not someone to be protected. "My father made promises I would not keep. Your brother accepted a bride who did not accept him." "A daughter's consent is not required," Standing Bear shot back. "You bring shame on us all. You will return now. Perhaps Thomas will still have you." "Thomas!" Ayanna said the name like it was poison. "Thomas, who beats women who displease him. Thomas, who thinks 20 horses gives him ownership of a person's soul. I will not be his possession." The third man finally spoke. His voice was soft, but it was the soft sound of a snake sliding through dry grass. "You speak of shame, sister? What shame is greater than abandoning your people for a white man?" "I betray nothing!" Ayanna's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "I claim the right to choose who shares my life. If that is betrayal, then I betray gladly." The sheriff cleared his throat, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Now, miss, these are serious accusations. But running away, well, it complicates things." "What are you saying, Sheriff?" Garrett asked, his voice quiet, too quiet. "I'm saying tribal law and our law don't always see eye to eye," Morrison said. "And folks get caught in the middle." "There is no middle!" Standing Bear boomed. "She is Shoshone, Your white law has no place here. And yet, Garrett said, his voice cutting through the anger, she stands on my land, under my protection. That makes it my affair. The air was thick with it now, the tension, the old hatreds, the new ones being born right here in his barnyard. The man with the feathers, the war chief, Marcus Swift Eagle, laughed. A cold, ugly sound. Listen to him, Joseph. He speaks of risk. He knows nothing of what is at stake. He knows nothing of watching his world die, piece by piece. Swift Eagle's eyes bored into Garrett. You think you are saving her, rancher? You are destroying her. You break a chain that goes back to the beginning of time. Any tradition that survives by breaking the spirits of its women, Garrett said, the words coming from a place deep inside him he didn't know existed, is already dead. Standing Bear's hand went to his rifle. Swift Eagle's hand tightened on his knife. Garrett didn't move. He felt Ayanna beside him, solid, unbending. Enough! Morrison barked, stepping between them. Nobody is taking anybody by force. Not on my watch. But then, Swift Eagle said something that chilled Garrett to the bone. And what happens when you ride away, Sheriff? He asked, his voice a deadly whisper. What happens when the rancher is all alone out here with his stolen bride? Do you think we will just forget? The threat hung in the air, a promise of violence to come, a promise of a cold, lonely winter. Garrett looked at Ayanna. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. He met Swift Eagle's gaze. Then, I guess, Garrett said softly, we'll all find out what kind of men we really are. The standoff was a wire-pulled taut. One wrong move, one wrong word, and blood would soak the dry ground of Garrett's ranch. Sheriff Morrison, a man who had built a career on finding the middle ground, looked like he was fresh out of options. All right, he said, his voice strained. Here's how this goes. Miss Ayanna, you tell me your side. Everything. No interruptions. He shot a hard look at Standing Bear. Everyone gets their turn. Ayanna stood taller. The fear was gone from her face, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She was no longer a victim. She was a witness. My name is Ayanna Bearwoman, she said, her voice ringing with clarity. When I was 16, my father promised me to Thomas Standing Bear. I tried for 4 years to be a good daughter. Her eyes found Joseph Standing Bear's, and she didn't flinch. But your brother showed me who he was. He struck me for speaking my mind. He told me a wife's purpose was submission. My own father agreed. The story tumbled out, each word a stone hitting the hard silence. 3 nights ago, the wedding preparations began. Thomas came to her family's lodge, drunk and angry. He said since I would soon be his wife, he had the right to claim what was already his. Her voice cracked, just for a second. When I refused him, he hit me. When I fought back, he laughed. He said he would teach me my place. She took a deep breath. I fought until he grew tired. He left, promising to finish my lesson after the ceremony. I decided I would rather die in the wild than live as his property. She twists the truth, Standing Bear roared. Thomas is a respected warrior. If he was firm, it was because she required it. And what honor is there in beating a woman who cannot fight back? Ayanna's question sliced through his excuses. Enough! Swift Eagle snapped. This is why our people grow weak. Too much questioning. A woman who will not submit to her husband will not submit to her people. She is a poison. There is more, Ayanna said, her voice dropping, pulling all of them in. I ran that night. They caught me before dawn. Thomas and his friends. They beat me again. She gestured to her bruised face. And then he said something that changed everything. He said once we returned to camp, he would publicly claim me, and that his word was now law, his word alone. The air went cold. This wasn't just about a marriage. This was a power grab. Then Ayanna did something Garrett never expected. She looked past Standing Bear, past Swift Eagle. Her eyes locked on Miguel, who had been standing silently by the barn, watching. Miguel Hernandez, she said, her voice clear. Your people know my people. You know the story of the running deer woman, your own aunt. Tell them what happens when men like Thomas Standing Bear take power. The world stopped. Miguel froze. Standing Bear and Swift Eagle turned to stare at the quiet foreman. A new player had just been forced onto the field. Miguel's face was a mask of pain. He looked at Garrett, then at Ayanna, a silent apology in his eyes. "It is true," Miguel said, his voice thick with a grief that was years old. "My aunt was given to a man like that. He broke her spirit, then he broke her bones. Our elders did nothing. They said it was family business. She died before the first snow." A shockwave went through the group. The carefully constructed arguments of tradition and honor from Standing Bear suddenly looked like what they were: hollow excuses for brutality. This wasn't just Ayanna's story anymore. It was a pattern, a sickness. But Standing Bear was not a man who backed down. He changed tactics. "This has nothing to do with my brother's honor. This woman did not just run. She is a thief." Garrett felt his stomach clench. "What are you talking about?" "The bride price was 20 horses, a sacred bloodline given in good faith. And there was more. A map. Passed down from our ancestors. A map to the winter hunting grounds, our secret to surviving the hard moons. Her father gave it to Thomas as a sign of trust. And now it is gone. She stole it when she fled." The accusation was a thunderclap. Ayanna was no longer a runaway bride. She was a traitor who had potentially condemned her entire people to starvation. The sheriff looked at her, his face grim. "Miss Ayanna, is this true?" Ayanna's chin lifted. "Yes," she said. "I took the map." The admission hung in the air, damning and absolute. Standing. Bear smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. He had her. He had won. Even Garrett felt a flicker of doubt. Why would she do that? Why would she endanger her own people? "Then this is settled," Standing Bear declared. "She is a criminal. She must be returned to us for justice." "No," Ayanna said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through Standing Bear's victory speech like a razor. "The map is not stolen. It is reclaimed." She reached into the folds of her ruined dress and pulled out a small, worn piece of rolled buckskin. "This map does not belong to the men of my tribe. It belongs to the women. It was passed from mother to daughter for generations. My mother gave it to me on her deathbed. My father had no right to give it away." This was a twist no one saw coming. A battle over marriage had become a battle over heritage, over survival, over the very soul of her people. "Lies!" Standing Bear bellowed, his composure finally shattering. "She lies to save her own skin." "Do I?" Ayanna said. She took a step toward Swift Eagle, the war chief, the man who valued tradition above all else. "Marcus Swift Eagle, you speak of the ancestors. Ask yourself this: who finds the healing herbs? Who knows the secret ways through the mountains when the passes are snowed in? Who teaches the children the old stories? The women. This knowledge belongs to us. Thomas was going to trade it. Trade our people's survival for more rifles, for more whiskey." Swift Eagle stared at her, his face a conflict of rage and dawning horror. He had built his life on defending the Shoshone way of life, and she was telling him that the man he was defending was the one planning to sell it all away. "She is poisoning you with her words," Standing Bear screamed, taking a step toward her. Garrett moved instantly, placing himself between them. "That's close enough," he said, his voice a low growl. The standoff was back, hotter and more dangerous than before. But now the lines were blurred. It wasn't white man against native. It was a man who beats women against a woman fighting for her life. It was a corrupt leader against the keeper of an ancient trust. Sheriff Morrison looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. I don't know what to do here," he admitted. "This is beyond me." "No, it's not," Garrett said. "It's simple. You have a man admitting he beat a woman. You have another man threatening violence, and you have a woman who is trying to protect her people from a terrible mistake." He looked at the sheriff. "Whose side does the law stand on, Tom?" Before Morrison could answer, Ayanna spoke again, her voice clear and strong, for all to hear. "There is one more secret. Thomas Standing Bear is a coward. 2 winters ago, when the wolves came down from the mountains, when real men stood to defend the camp, he hid in his lodge. I saw it. Others saw it. But they are too afraid to speak. He is not a warrior. He is a bully who preys on those weaker than himself. She had laid all her cards on the table. She had exposed his violence, his corruption, his cowardice. She had risked everything. The silence that followed was different. It was a silence of judgment. Every man there was looking at Joseph Standing Bear, waiting for him to defend his brother. But Standing Bear had no words. His lies had been stripped bare. All that was left was the ugly, brutal truth. And in that moment, something broke. Marcus Swift Eagle, the war chief, the man of tradition, slowly turned his back on Joseph Standing Bear. He faced Ayanna. He looked at the map in her hand. He looked at the bruises on her face. And then he gave a slow, solemn nod. He had made his choice. Honor was not with the man who beat women. It was with the woman who had the courage to tell the truth. It was over. Standing Bear stood alone, his authority, his honor, his entire world crumbling around him. He stared at Garrett with eyes full of pure, undiluted hatred. A hatred that would not fade with the seasons. A hatred that would wait and watch for its moment. Then, without another word, he mounted his horse and rode away, a man defeated not by force, but by the courage of a single woman. Swift Eagle lingered a moment longer. He looked at Ayanna, then at Garrett. "You have made a powerful enemy today," he said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. "And you," he said to Ayanna, "have reminded me what our people are truly fighting for." He too turned and rode away, leaving Garrett and Ayanna standing in the quiet morning sun. The days that followed were a strange kind of peace. A peace that felt like the quiet in the eye of a storm. Ayanna moved into the spare room, but the house no longer felt like it had a guest. It felt full. She had a quiet way about her, a competence that touched everything. She mended Garrett's clothes with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She cooked meals that tasted of the earth and the sky. She had a way with the horses, a gentle command that they understood and respected. Garrett watched her, fascinated. He was a man used to solitude, to the simple repeating rhythms of ranch life. Ayanna was a whirlwind of quiet strength that was rearranging his entire world. They didn't talk about what happened. They didn't talk about the future. They lived in the now, in the small moments of a shared meal, a quiet evening by the fire, a walk to the barn in the cool twilight. He was falling in love with her. The realization didn't hit him like a lightning bolt. It seeped into him slowly, like rain into dry ground, until he was saturated with it. One evening, they were sitting on the porch, watching the stars come out. "You never told me your second thoughts," she said softly. "Are you?" he asked back, the old question hanging between them. He thought about the threat in Standing Bear's eyes. He thought about the long, isolated winters. He thought of the trouble he had invited into his life. "No," he said, and the word was the truest thing he had ever spoken. "No second thoughts." She smiled, a real smile this time, and it was like watching the sun rise. "Good," she said, "because I have chosen." But their fragile peace was not meant to last. Trouble, once invited, rarely leaves without a fight. It started small. A section of fence cut in the night, his cattle scattered across the valley. A week later, his prize bull, the future of his herd, was found sick, poisoned with something that took all of Elena's skill to counteract. These weren't accidents. They were messages. We are here. We are watching. We have not forgotten. Miguel grew quiet, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines. The memory of his aunt haunted him. "This is how it begins," he told Garrett one night. "Small things. To make you afraid. To make you feel alone." Garrett started carrying his rifle with him everywhere, even just across the yard. The simple safety of his ranch had been stolen. He was living in a state of siege. Then Elena came back from a trip to town, her face pale. "People are talking," she said, her voice trembling. "Standing Bear has been visiting the other bands. He is telling a new story. He says the white rancher, Holloway, put lies in Ayanna's head, that he covets Shoshone land, and that he stole Ayanna to get to the sacred map. It was a clever lie. A lie designed to twist their story into something ugly, something that would ignite old fears and old hatreds. He was turning her own people against her. That night, Ayanna came to him. The worry that had been a shadow in her eyes for weeks was now a storm. "He is twisting my truth," she whispered. "He is making me a traitor." "We know the truth," Garrett said, his hand finding hers in the dark. Her hand was cold. "The truth is not enough," she said. "He is building an army of hate. He will not stop until he has destroyed you to get to me." She was right. Standing Bear wasn't just coming for revenge. He was coming to erase a truth that threatened his power, and he would burn Garrett's whole world to the ground to do it. The quiet life Garrett Holloway had known was over. Winter was coming, and it was bringing a war with it. The first snow fell, a light dusting that turned the valley into a world of white and gray. It was beautiful, but it felt like a shroud. The threats were no longer subtle. One morning, they found a wolf, shot and gutted, hanging from the main gate of the ranch. A clear, brutal message. This is what we do to our enemies. Fear was a constant guest in the house now. It sat with them at dinner. It watched them from the dark windows at night. Garrett saw the toll it was taking on Ayanna. The defiance in her eyes was still there, but it was banked, shadowed by a deep, weary sadness. She was a prisoner on this ranch, the very place she had chosen as her sanctuary. He felt a rage build in him, cold and hard. He had offered her safety, and all he had brought her was a bigger cage. "This has to end," he said to Miguel one night, as they cleaned their rifles by the fire. "We can't live like this, waiting for the next shadow to fall." "What can we do?" Miguel asked, his voice grim. "They will not listen to reason. Standing Bear has poisoned them with his lies. Then, we have to give them a truth they can't ignore," Garrett said. "Something bigger than his lies." He found Ayanna in the barn, talking softly to Storm. The mare was heavy with her foal, and Ayanna often spent hours with her. A silent communion of two souls carrying precious burdens. "I need you to tell me everything," he said, his voice gentle. "Everything about Thomas. Everything about the map. There's a piece of this I'm missing. A secret you're still holding." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. He saw the conflict there. The years of learning that secrets were survival, that trust was a trap. "Trust me, Ayanna," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he couldn't name. "Let me help you fight back." She took a deep breath. And finally, the last wall came down. "There is a reason my father gave Thomas the map," she said. "He did not do it willingly. Thomas found something out. My father, he is a good man, but he is weak. Years ago, he made a bad trade with a white whiskey runner. A trade that brought sickness to our camp. Many died. Thomas learned of this. He blackmailed my father, the map, and my hand in marriage, for his silence." The story was uglier, more twisted than he could have imagined. Her father wasn't a tyrant. He was a man trapped by his own past, sacrificing his daughter to save his own reputation. "And Thomas?" Garrett asked. "Why was he so desperate for the map?" "Because he is a fool," Ayanna said, a flash of her old fire returning. "He believes the map leads not just to hunting grounds but to a lost silver mine the old stories speak of. He doesn't want to save our people. He wants to get rich. He was going to sell the location to the railroad men. He would have brought an army of white miners into the heart of our sacred lands. It would have been the end of us." This was it. The final piece. The truth that was bigger than Standing Bear's lies. Thomas wasn't just a brute and a coward. He was a traitor of the highest order, willing to sell out his own people for personal gain. And Joseph Standing Bear was his accomplice. "Does anyone else know this?" Garrett asked. "Only my father. And he is too afraid to speak." "Then we have to make him speak," Garrett said. A desperate, insane plan was forming in his mind. A plan that would either save them or get them all killed. He sent Miguel on a perilous journey. He was to ride to the reservation, not to the Shoshone, but to the Arapaho. Their chief, a man named Black Kettle, was known for his wisdom and his fairness. Miguel carried a message from Garrett, a plea for a council, a neutral ground where the truth could be heard. It was a long shot. There was no love lost between the tribes, and a white rancher asking for intervention was unheard of. While Miguel was gone, Garrett and Ayana prepared. They were no longer just waiting. They were planning. Ayana took out the map. "It is more than just lines on a hide," she explained. "It is a story, and Thomas cannot read it. Only a daughter of my mother's line can decipher the symbols." She pointed to a series of knots on the fringe. "This is a warning about the silver. It is not a treasure. It is a curse. The story says it poisons the water and the land around it." The mine was real, and it was poison. Thomas would have led his people not to wealth, but to ruin. Days later, Miguel returned. He was exhausted, but his eyes held a glimmer of hope. "Black Kettle will listen," he said. "He has sent word to Standing Bear and to Ayana's father, calling for a council at the Three Rivers, in 2 days' time." The gamble had paid off, but now came the most dangerous part. They had to get to the Three Rivers, a full day's ride, without being ambushed by Standing Bear's men. And they had to convince a shamed, frightened old man to tell the truth and condemn his own choice for a son-in-law. The odds were impossibly long, but it was the only chance they had. As they saddled the horses in the pre-dawn darkness, Ayana turned to Garrett. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Me too," he said. "But we do this together." He helped her onto her horse, and as they rode out into the cold, uncertain dawn, he knew that whatever happened at the Three Rivers, his life was now tied to hers, for better or for worse. The lonely rancher was gone. In his place was a man who had found something worth fighting for. Something worth dying for. The ride to the Three Rivers was a long, tense journey through a landscape that felt hostile and watchful. Every shadow could be an ambush. Every gust of wind could be a whispered threat. Garrett, Ayana, and Miguel rode in a tight triangle, their eyes constantly scanning the trees and the ridgelines. They were 3 small figures against a vast, indifferent wilderness, heading toward a meeting that would decide all their fates. They arrived as the sun was setting, painting the sky in bloody shades of red and orange. The Three Rivers met in a wide, flat clearing, a place that had been neutral ground for generations. A large fire burned in the center, and around it were 2 groups. On one side, Chief Black Kettle and a dozen of his Arapaho warriors, their faces impassive, watchful. On the other, Joseph Standing Bear, a dozen of his own men, and among them, a hunched older man who Garrett knew must be Ayana's father, Chief Bear Woman. There was no sign of Thomas. As they dismounted, a heavy silence fell over the clearing. All eyes were on Ayana. Standing Bear stepped forward, his face a mask of contempt. "So the thief returns," he said, his voice booming across the clearing. "She comes with her white lover to spin more lies." Chief Black Kettle rose. He was an old man, but he stood with an authority that commanded respect. "We are not here for insults, Joseph Standing Bear," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We are here for truth. Garrett Holloway has asked for this council. He will speak." Garrett stepped forward, his heart pounding. "I am not here to speak for Ayana," he said, his voice carrying in the still air. "She has a voice of her own. I am here because lies have been told that threaten to spill blood between all our peoples. Lies that paint this woman as a traitor, when the truth is, she is the only one who has been loyal." He turned to Ayana. "Tell them," he said. "Tell them everything." Ayana walked into the center of the circle, the firelight dancing on her face. She did not look at her father. She did not look at Standing Bear. She looked at Chief Black Kettle. "I fled a marriage to a man who beat me," she began, her voice steady and clear. The story poured out of her. The story of Thomas's brutality, his cowardice, his blackmail of her father. And finally, the ultimate betrayal. His plan to sell the location of the sacred poisoned silver mine to the railroad. When she finished, a stunned silence held the clearing. Standing Bear began to laugh. "A child's fantasy, a desperate story to hide her crimes. Where is her proof?" "Her proof is here," Garrett said. He looked directly at Chief Bear Woman. "Tell them, old man, tell them the truth. Tell them how Thomas blackmailed you. Your daughter's life and the future of your people depend on your courage now." Ayana's father looked up, his face a tragedy of fear and shame. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Standing Bear, at the hard faces of his men, and the fear won. He shook his head, looking down at the ground. She is confused," he stammered. "Grief has made her imagine things." A wave of despair washed over Garrett. It was over. They had lost. Standing Bear's triumphant smile was a knife in his gut. But then, something happened he never could have predicted. Miguel stepped forward. "If he will not speak the truth," Miguel said, his voice ringing with the pain of his own past, "then I will." All eyes turned to him. "My name is Miguel Hernandez," he said to Black Kettle. "My people are the Ute, but my aunt married into this man's band." He pointed a shaking finger at Standing Bear. "She was given to a man just like Thomas, and when she tried to speak out, she was silenced, just as you are trying to silence Ayana now. This is a sickness in your people, Joseph Standing Bear, a sickness of pride and violence, and it will destroy you." Miguel's testimony, from an outsider, a man with no stake other than the memory of his own family's pain, shifted the ground. Doubt began to flicker in the eyes of Standing Bear's own men. They had heard the whispers about Thomas. They knew his reputation. Suddenly, Ayana's story didn't seem so impossible. Then Ayana played her final card. She held up the map. "Joseph Standing Bear says I cannot read this map. He is right. No man can." She walked to her father. "But you can," she said softly. "You watched my mother teach me. You know the women's symbols. Tell them what this one means." She pointed to the symbol for the silver mine. "Tell them. It is the symbol for poison." Her father looked at the map. He looked at his daughter's brave, pleading face. He looked at the hard, threatening glare of Joseph Standing Bear. And in that moment, something inside the old broken man finally found its strength. He took the map. He held it up for all to see. And in a voice shaking with years of shame, but finally clear with truth, he spoke. "She is right," he said. "The silver is a curse. And Thomas knew. He was going to sell our future. I was a coward. My daughter is a warrior." It was a confession. It was an absolution. It was a damnation. Joseph Standing Bear's world shattered. His lies were exposed, his brother condemned not by an enemy, but by the very man he had used as a pawn. He let out a roar of fury and lunged, not at Ayana's father, but at Garrett. He was the cause of all this, the white man who had upended his world. But Miguel was faster. He tackled Standing Bear, and the two men went down in a tangle of limbs. Warriors from both sides surged forward. The clearing exploded into chaos. Garrett pulled Ayana behind him, drawing his pistol. But there were too many. This was it. This was how it ended. In a senseless, bloody fight in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Not from Garrett's gun. The sound was deafening. Everyone froze. Chief Black Kettle stood with a smoking pistol pointed at the sky. "Enough!" he bellowed, and his voice carried the weight of 100 winters. "There will be no more fighting on this ground." The warriors slowly, reluctantly, pulled back. Standing Bear was hauled to his feet by two of Black Kettle's men. His face was bloody, his eyes wild with hate. "The truth has been spoken," Black Kettle announced, his gaze sweeping over the Shoshone men. "You have a traitor in your midst, and a coward for a chief." He looked at Ayana's father. "Your courage came late, but it came. What happens now is your decision. Shoshone business." He then turned to Standing Bear. "But any violence against this man," he nodded at Garrett, "or this woman, is now an offense against the Arapaho as well. You have my word." It was a promise. It was a shield. The Shoshone warriors looked at each other. They looked at their shamed chief, at the disgraced Joseph Standing Bear, and then at Ayana, who stood tall, the map held tight in her hand. One warrior, then another, walked over and stood behind her. They had made their choice. They chose the truth. They chose their future. They chose her. The journey back to the ranch was different. The land no longer felt like an enemy. The silence was not tense, but peaceful. They had faced the worst, and they had survived. More than survived. They had won. That night, sitting on the porch, Ayanna took Garrett's hand. Her hand was warm in his. "You saved my life," she said. "No," he said, looking at her in the soft moonlight. "You saved mine." He had been a man living in a fortress of solitude, safe, but not alive. She had torn down his walls and dragged him into the messy, dangerous, beautiful world. Months passed. The snows melted. The valley turned green again. Storm gave birth to a healthy foal, a little gray filly with her mother's stubborn spirit. They named her Hope. Ayanna's father stepped down as chief, and a new council was chosen, one that included the voices of women for the first time in generations. Thomas and Joseph Standing Bear were exiled, their names spoken only as a cautionary tale. There was a new peace in the valley, a peace that had been earned with courage and truth. One day, Garrett and Ayanna rode out to the creek where they had first met. The willows were green, the water ran clear. It was just a place on a map, but for them, it was the beginning of the world. "I choose you, Garrett Holloway," she had said in desperation. Now she turned to him, her eyes full of a love that was as wild and strong as the land around them. "I choose you," she said again. And this time, it wasn't a plea. It was a promise. He leaned in and kissed her, and in that kiss was the end of one story and the beginning of another. A story of two people from different worlds who found a home in each other. A story of how sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is the only thing that can truly set you free. It wasn't an easy path, and the scars of what they'd been through would always be a part of them. But as they built their life together, they proved that love could be a bridge between two worlds, and that the bravest thing a person can do is choose. If you believe that courage can change the world, and that everyone deserves the right to choose their own path, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the next story we have for you.